I was going to make a grand entrance and then I tripped over my patio chair. Hello and good morning. It's Julie here, your host of Julie Davis Flower Workshops and Flower Start, the online flower arranging classes. Now, I've been having a little bit of a wander around my garden and I've discovered some new growth. So I'm going to snip a little bit off and show it to you. All very exciting this time of year. There's lots of bulbs starting to come through. So this tends to be one of my other bulb graveyards. So when I've had my bulbs flowering indoors, I tend to either put them at the end of the garden. I have a little collection here just outside the back door, and I do know that we've got quite a lot of grape hyacinths, and I can see that distinctive short bushy growth, and also the hydrangea is starting to come out into flower. And what I wanted to show you is this. So snip snip, a little feathery frond, and it smells absolutely beautiful. So there we have, look, a miniature tree. This is a fennel. I think this is a bronzy fennel that looks very green at the moment. So if you are watching along live, please leave me the hashtag live, or perhaps you'd like to leave me a question. And if you're watching later on today or next week, leave me the hashtag replay and we can catch up in the comments. And I can see Joan and Linda are watching. So good morning, ladies. It's lovely to have you with me today. So my goal for today is a little bit of tidying up. My hyacinths have gone over and gone a little bit leggy. I've took out all the supports because I used them in another little potted arrangement, which looks absolutely beautiful. It's perfect. I got the supports in nice and early before anything got leggy, and it looks like a little winter wonderland. So what do you do when your bulbs have gone over, the flowers have gone over, and you end up with something looking a bit bedraggled? I'm hesitating there because I was just checking out Joan's questions. Joan was asking whether I have got any videos on how to arrange flowers using the glass flower blocks. Now, Joan, I think I have. I've definitely got a video on glass flower blocks when, I don't know if I showed you my collection, but I've definitely done a sort of roundup of glass flower blocks. And last Christmas, if I remember correctly, my husband gave me a glass flower block with the container. It was a little glass ridged pedestal, so high, and then it was an open glass bowl, and I think it's cloud glass. Mine was a brown, a bit of a drudgy Victorian looking brown, but it's sort of got these sort of ripples of colour. I think they come in other colours as well. And rather handily, when I turned it over, there was a maker's mark and a serial number at the bottom, and I was able to look up who it was by, and I can't immediately remember. And that had then a glass flower block that sat inside the purpose-designed bowl with a little well in it. And I am pretty certain that I did a flower arrangement in that as well. What I will say, Joan, if you're arranging your flowers in the glass block, for those of you who don't know, it's a little disc of glass which is sort of so deep, and again they come in all different colours. I've got clear ones and coloured ones, some tiny ones and bigger ones. I've even got one that's egg-shaped. But the thing is, if you can imagine, if you drew a circle and then you sort of got a big big pen and did loads of dots all over it, that is what the glass flower block looks like. I'm just going to lift that candle up so I can feel like I'm actually talking to you. So when you start off your arrangement, first of all, you need to put your block in a reservoir of water. And I think the glass blocks, I think they were originally designed for quite shallow containers, and they're quite difficult to arrange in because there's sort of not enough angle to get your flowers in and not enough water in the reservoir to keep your flowers going. But I've started doing is taking the glass blocks, the little discs, and putting them in other containers. So it's almost like, you know, when you use a grid of tape across a vase, it's almost like you're instead of doing a grid of tape, you're putting your flower block in, and as long as the vase is the right size that it holds the flower block, it doesn't immediately drop down or smash, you should be okay. And I find that when I use them, it's like any other non-flower foam mechanic, is that you'll start off by very carefully putting your stems into the holes, and it'll get they'll get held up in a really rigid way, a very perhaps Victorian Edwardian look, because they'll be sticking out. And when we're trying to arrange our flowers, we want to have this natural sense of rhythm and flow, and you use your glass flower block and it just looks very angular. But once you've got the basic stems in, you can then use your stems as the flower support. So not every stem that you put into your vase or container has to go through the hole. Your first ones will have to, but after that you can do a bit more freeform, and that will help you sort of loosen up the straitjacket of arranging in the glass flower block. And like everything, as long as you've recut your stems and the stems actually in water, you should be fine. But definitely, I have in mind, it's either one video or two videos. So when I finish filming, excuse me, I will try and remember to link them in the video description. And also, Joan, I will see if I can put them into the free Facebook group. So if you're not already in the Facebook group Flower Start World, if you click the link which is under the video description, you can join and have a look. And that's normally where all the chat takes place. Joan was asking, why were the bowls so shallow? I don't know, Joan. Was it just the fashion at the moment, at the time? So bearing in mind, I'm not an expert, but I would say the flower frogs were in vogue. I don't know, Victorian Edwardian First World War, Second World War. So we weren't getting commercially grown flowers, as we do now. You go to the supermarket, you buy a bunch of 10 and they're all exactly that length. So it was about arranging garden flowers. So some of them were short stems, some of them were wiggly stems. And I guess it's just the evolution, isn't it, of what people wanted to do with their flowers. And perhaps the fashion at that time was to have quite low arrangements. I sort of got this vision of these bowls being put on, pedestal stands. So imagine if you're, in an Edwardian glass house, and sort of like a very high table, wooden table with a plinth at the top, and then you'd have your arrangement on the top. So it's an interesting question, but quite often you'll find, because I was quite surprised when my husband gifted me my flower frog that came in 3 parts, so the pedestal, the bowl, and the frog and the glass block, because normally when you find the glass blocks, the bowl isn't with it. So whether it's that the glass container has got smashed over time, or they just become separated, or that the glass blocks could be used in other containers, you didn't have to match it with the container you came in. I don't know, but I think probably, Joan, it was all about innovation at the time and responding to fashion at the time. I don't know, I'm making it up. So did it evolve from, Sue says, did it evolve from glass to metal pin holders? Yes, so this brings me on to Julia Clements. I'm doing a project at the moment where I watched a film over the holidays with Meryl Streep in it, and she inspired me to get my hair cut, tamed my lockdown locks. And I was talking to my friend. Do you remember I said I had this sort of mentoring meeting with a friend of mine who runs her own business, and she said that, she suggested that she was a non-flower arranger, that why didn't I do a project just to sort of kickstart things with my business again. And we were talking about this film, we were talking about Meryl Streep, and we landed up talking about Julie and Julia. So I don't know if you've seen the film. It was about a New Yorker called Julie Powell who who cooked everything in Julia Child's cookbook. And I don't know who Julia Childs is, but I think probably she was... she's like a Delia Smith to us, but to Americans, that is Julia Childs. Although Julia Childs, I think she wrote her book in the 50s, so she was sort of a slightly older generation. But I believe it's sort of like the Bible for cooking in America, or French cooking for Americans. So that's what I set myself the challenge to do. So Julie Powell, I think she cooked about 450 recipes in a year. And I'm doing the same with Julia Clements. But I have chosen Julia Clements' first book because specifically I wanted to do the challenge by not using flour foam. So some of her older books, the ending chapters talks about flour foam as being this new exciting innovation. But she does talk a little bit about the glass flour blocks, and she talks about the glass flour blocks being pre-war, and then coming on to your question, Sue, about how it evolved. And the pin holder was the new invention, evolution of flour arranging in the post-war period. Again, I do not know whether I'm telling you stuff correctly, but that is my gleaning of where we've got so far. And then it was... so she wrote her, the book I'm reading from hers at the moment is first published in the 1950s. The book I already had on my bookshelf was a 1977 reprint of a book I think was first published in '69, and she was just talking about flour foam in the end chapters there. And I know that, Joan, you said you had a book by Julia Clements. So yes, that's where I'm at the moment. So I'm not doing hundreds and hundreds of flour arrangements, but I have gone through her book, and it's quite amusing. You know how if you ever do shop for flour arranging books at your local charity shop, I don't know about you, but you open the book, you flick through the pages, and you kind of immediately know whether you like the book. You might recognise the author, you're drawn to the photographs, and I think these days I kind of read the pictures and not the text. And quite often, if a book is in black and white, I have a little bit of a giggle to myself, because I think, here you are doing this book about flour arranging, and you can't see the flowers. So that is sort of my challenge as well, because the whole of this book is black and white photographs, and she is quite good at telling you what flower she's used and telling you the colours. So she talks about the blue hydrangea she's used, and the colour of the roses and things like that. So that's going to be quite a challenge. But I thought perhaps I would be shining a light on Julia and looking at her black and white world in the post-war years and bringing it up to date. And as Joan has just said in the comment, looking back to go forwards, if you know what I mean. So here we are, Julia Clements thinking, in the late 60s, 70s, wasn't flour foam, the greatest thing since sliced bread. And now we're thinking, actually, it's not quite so good, is it, in terms of the environment and the single-use plastic aspect. So there's this whole movement, hashtag floristry is changing, hashtag foam-free flowers, when we are going back to the old ways. So it's really great if you had a mother and aunt, a grandmother who was into flower arranging, because you may have learnt this stuff when you were a child. But my mum and I am the first flower arranger in our family, so I had no one to learn from other than the ladies who are in my flower club I've been a member of for nearly 25 years. So it's quite interesting. But I quite like the historical side of it as well. So this book was written when my mum was 19, so she wasn't yet married, and written in the post-war. And it sounds like the country was still quite gloomy. And Julia's saying, actually, she talks to me a little bit, because I can hear her words coming out of my mouth when I talk to you. And we're either on the same wavelength, or telepathically, or because I've done lots and lots of reading around the subject of flower arranging, that she sort of set the benchmark way back when in the 50s, and everyone else since has built on what she said originally. So here I am, 60 years later, saying, was it 70 years later, I'm saying the same things that, what she was saying in the 50s is still equally as relevant today. But there are a few little things that, again, I need to investigate in the book, because she does talk about doing lots of arrangements in baskets and lining her baskets with lead. So this is the lead that you would use as lead flashing on the roof. And I have actually got a piece of lead which I picked up. It was a flower show. I don't know whether it was a NAFAS flower show or something else, but I can remember going to the exhibition centre in Islington, where I know that the NAFAS has previously held its big exhibitions. And I remember watching, now what was his name? Ercole, I can't remember, Ercole something with an M, his surname. But there had been a programme on TV following the McQueen's Florist. So this I must have been married by then, so it must have been late 90s, perhaps early 2000s, I don't quite remember. And I can remember this chap, Ercole Moroni, let's guess that name, I'll have to look that up. And he was doing an arrangement using this sheet of lead. And I think basically what he did, from memory, that he had hyacinths in it, and he basically put the hyacinths in it and sort of almost wrapped them up and in this piece of lead that you could bend and shape and whatever. And my friend and I can't even remember who I went with, but I definitely did go with a friend, because we bought a piece of this lead and we cut it in half and we shared it. So then when I was looking up, perhaps I should investigate buying some lead to line my baskets to go foam free. But then of course, you got all those health warnings about lead. You remember our paint used to have lead in it, and of course our petrol used to have lead in it. And then you start Googling what the health and safety is, and really you shouldn't be touching it. But it's not as if, so I'm a bit wary there. Should I go really authentic Julia Clements and buy some lead and start arranging my flowers in lead? Bearing in mind, I'm not going to be breathing in the fumes or the particles 24/7, but I am going to be touching it. So I'm just a bit in two minds about what I should do with that. It's a bit like, I'm not saying it's asbestos, but I can remember my mum's ironing board had an asbestos sheet, I'm sure it was an asbestos sheet, underneath the little rack where you put her iron. So things do change for good reason, and I'm just slightly nervous about that. And the other thing you might be able to help me about, she talks about, I'm rambling, Jane, I'm rambling, but I'm getting my thoughts out there, because it may be that it sparks, perhaps it sparks a discussion and we can investigate a little bit more. Julia Clements also talks about using builder's size, SIZE, to preserve branches. Now, I don't know whether she means, again, perhaps if you're a household DIYer, you might know the answer to this. Is builder's size the equivalent of polyfiller, a runny polyfiller? Or is it more a PVA glue kind of thing? I don't know. Sue is asking an interesting question about the lead, and if I got the lead holding my reservoir of water, when I tip away the water, is the lead that's running off then polluting the watercourses? Good point. But you do still get lead flashings, don't you? The whole, where you get, I'm trying to look up into our chimney, on roofs, don't you, if you've got a valley gutter, or the flashing you get around the edge of your chimney. We've got a chimney. So I think it's still being, I know it's still being used in the building industry, because I checked out our local hardware store. It's a sort of mum and pop store, not one of these big shed things. So you can still buy it. And I've already earmarked the sheet that I will buy. I can buy off the roll up to 60 millimetres wide, so it's 2 foot wide. And I was thinking I could get, 60 by 60, it'd be quite a handy piece to use. So yes, I just don't know what the answer is to this question. But I guess as long as I'm not licking it, said in jest, I haste, So it'd be quite interesting to explore that. I quite like the idea though of an arrangement in Boston, especially because we're going foam free. Especially if you remember last year, I had a subscription to flowers that got delivered to me from my local flower farm. It's all sort of coming back to that, just being a little more self-sufficient and using what we've got. And I thought, if I, the height of summer, when you've got all those beautiful traditional, English garden flowers, that it would be quite nice to arrange them in a very traditional way, in a basket. And that whole thing, when we've done, I'm sure you've done them too, when you've done an arrangement in quite a flat basket with a piece of flower foam. If you've done it where you've had the flowers that side and then you put the stems in that side, so it looks like you have just carried it in from the garden. So we're sort of mocking up something with flower foam that would look like what it looked like originally. So I was just thinking, why not cut out the middleman, get rid of the flower foam, and then just arrange my flowers in a basket. But yes, you've got to line the basket with something in order that the water doesn't flow away. So I think we've posed more questions than we've answered. Oh, thank you, Sue. Builder's size is watered down PVA. Now, I wish now I'd marked the page in the book where I talked about that. And I can't do a word search because it's not on the computer. So I will have to log that. I've definitely got some PVA glue and my branches. So I guess that means with my silver birch twigs that I could paint them and it would preserve them. And I quite like the idea of that because you get the little catkins on the end, but of course as the season develops and it gets warmer, the buds mature and they stop being these sort of little woody sausages, almost like a skinny pine cone, and they open out into those yellowy tassels. So it would be quite nice to sort of suspended animation and just have them at that point that you wanted to have them. So yes, that would be a project. And you do know how I love to mix my craft with my flower arranging. So it's sort of, quite nice on that crafting to flower arranging continuum. So on with the show. I wanted to show you something. As you know, I'm always going charity shop buying, and I'm newly the member, the secretary of our flower club I go to 6 times a year. It's a contemporary design flower club, and I'm on the committee now. And we have decided that we're going to have a pre-loved sale, and anything that's sold, you make a 10% donation to the flower club. So because I'm on the committee, to get to the meeting really early in order to welcome the regular members, and I spotted this now. It's not too heavy because I've filled it with compost, so I've done a bit of prep. For £5, I've got this. It looks a little bit like a coal scuttle. Now, my eyes darted that way because my husband is just coming down for breakfast, and about this time, I can see him gurning through the kitchen window thinking, what on earth are you doing, Julie? So what I've got is this pot, and my friend who donated it, she said, it needs a bit of a polish, but I quite like this sort of weathered look. And it's got this sort of lion face here with the little handles. So an absolute classic shape. And you can imagine, in the height of summer, I have to see whether there's something of Julia's I can make. I could scrunch up my chicken wire and it would make a lovely flowing pedestal. But what I have done is I filled it up with compost, because all my flowers are getting leggy. What am I going to do with them? My white hyacinths are just starting to brown off a bit. And then I've got loads of little pots, and I've decided that other than that one that I've got upstairs where I put my twigs in, they're just too shallow. I haven't got anywhere to put them. And actually what I quite like is having them on my patio table. So I've started them off indoors. I've really been enjoying watching them grow, but there's just sort of too much of them, only in the sense that I don't have the kind of house that's got lots of surfaces to display things on. So I thought if I corral them together, I could have them in one great big pot and then enjoy it, instead of itsy bitsy all around the housey, just one big collection of the flowering bulbs. And the ones that I'm a little bit disappointed in were my very expensive paper whites I bought last year, but I think this bowl has been standing in quite a dark corner of our living room, so I thought I might sort of unpack everything and then replant them in my container and sort of breathe a little bit of new life into it. So I think probably the moment has come when I need to take my gloves off and get down to work. So this is quite a big container. I've taken my own advice and only put the compost up. I've left myself about this much because I found I'd overfilled my shallow containers to the point where I couldn't really water them without the water spilling off. So I've come purposely down a little bit low. The reason I was worried about the weight, because of heavy compost, but I haven't actually filled it totally. I found some, we've obviously had a terracotta pot breakage, so I got quite large, I mean they're sort of hand-sized piece of terracotta pot, and I've put them shape side up, curved side up, to sort of fill out the bottom and also to allow the excess water to drain down at the bottom. So what I thought I would do is this. I'm going to replant everything. So turning all this out, oh, look at that. I am a gardener, look at that roof growth. And this was done in the little bunt tin. So it looks like a donut of coverage. And it's quite wet. Again, these little tins didn't have any drainage. I did have, what did I have? A gravel at the bottom. So these, I think, are tulips, and I have a feeling that these came with a delivery box of flowers, Bloom and Wild, I think, and it came with tulips, and they had the tulips on the bulb. So I'm digging down. Now I'm thinking I put too much terracotta in the bottom. I can't dig down as much as I thought I was going to. And I think the problem I had in terms of, do I like what I've done, is I don't think I have been massing my bulbs together enough. They're just a little bit too spaced out. So I really want a sort of cacophony of blooms. And so to pack them much tighter together than you would imagine that you would need to do. So I'm kind of breaking the rules and getting them all to sit really compactly together. What I did like about these containers, I've really been enjoying my little decorative details over the top. Again, I just think it adds a little bit of added extra, and I may well put these back on, with a little bit of Scots pine, because when you take it off, it just looks a bit plain and unexciting. So let's tip that out as well. And again, there's some good. What do you reckon those are? I'm thinking Tate mini daffs. So replanting those. I'm going to just put the bulbs back in there so I can see. I empty them direct into the pot because I don't want to have to do loads of clearing up. But I will have to see what I've got. I plant. I was just deciding whether they were bulbs, but I think they're just shiny pebbles. And then when I have totally finished, I will make sure I push down everything to make sure it's nice and secure. So look, even the ones that look like they weren't doing anything, they've got a little bit of spidery growth there. So ladies, those of you who are watching, that we are starting the teaching class next week. So if you're watching this video on replay, I am going to be teaching a class on how to teach your own flower class. So if you are super confident in your, how you think a class should be taught, this may not be for you. But if you're slightly nervous, again, I like these pine cones on top, about teaching your first class, you may find that you only need the first class I'm going to teach to give you that little spurt of confidence. So the class is now, the early bird discount has finished. You can see me puzzling here about how to do this. So it's £25 for the first class, and depending on what you want to do, I will run further classes in the future, just diving a little bit deeper into what I do and lessons that you can learn from me as to how I teach my classes. So hopefully that will give us a little bit of something a little bit different, especially really this time of year when it's there's nothing growing in the garden, and I didn't want to do a flower class where it meant that you were having to go out and buy flowers at this expensive time of the year. I thought I would just wait a little bit longer, delay the fresh flower classes until either you had things growing in your garden or things were just slightly more plentiful and therefore better value for money. So I'm digging down with my fingers here. Now I had thought I would put my hyacinth bulbs in here, the ones that had already flowered, because what you want to do is when you've got your bulbs, I would tend to, you've got to keep the bulbs living in order that they get enough energy for next year. So what I'm going to do here is take out the flower heads that are quite obviously gone over. So they will go on the compost heap. And I quite like the sort of second life that your bulbs get, because you could kind of, if you squinty look at it, you could pretend that that your flowers haven't come into flower yet, so it's a bit of green growth. So I'm not actually going to do that. I'm going to leave that in the garden just so it can keep sort of summing itself up and getting energy. And then these ones, I'm a tiny bit disappointed. These are this year's growth. Now, I do wonder whether perhaps I haven't looked after them quite as well as I should. This compost is quite dry, but they sort of browned off and a bit stunted growth. So I want to get the best out of this. So I think really I'm going to have to be cruel to be kind, and taking off, look, it's all brown there, take off the stuff that looks brown. And then if I position this on the kitchen windowsill, I do seem to have got 2 heads on each bulb actually, and that looks loads better. It kind of looks a little bit more intentional. I have still got this random growth here. I think I might plant that in my other container just so it doesn't distract from my look. So that needs a little bit of soil, but it is much improved, I think, having cutting off the dead bits, and rather than just chucking everything away. So it's a bit like with flower arrangement, just cut out the bits that have gone a little bit brown, and then you can enjoy that a little bit longer. So it does need a water, and actually, yes, it looks loads better. So that's going back on the kitchen windowsill. These ones are going to be outdoors underneath the kitchen windowsill so they can carry on growing. And I must remember I'm going to put these ones inside the bowl I've just planted, because I don't think they're very happy in here. So this was my sort of terrarium style planting, and they've not really done much. And then what I've got is a lot of washing up to do at the end. So here I had a lot of moss, so I could have collected all my decorative materials together, and then got those bulbs. Oh, there's one there I was going to say it had no growth. I think it has died. It looked like it tried to grow and then it's gone all mushy inside. So I will put those back and put the last lot of stems in. So these ones have started to flop already. So what I am going to do, actually I think that might have been a hyacinth there, rather than a leggy hyacinth, rather than a paper white. So digging down, and then I might put some of my sticks in, again to make it look a bit more intentional. It's flopping everywhere at the moment, which isn't a good look. And I think possibly I've been overwatering this. So, note to self. I was worried about it being in sort of a slightly inaccessible location. I was a bit heavy-handed with my watering can. And then with my silver birch twigs. I'm going to start putting these in just to offer a tiny bit of support as it grows, and therefore I won't be in that situation I was in last time when I was sort of having to use my twigs as like laundry props to get my greenery to sit up. So a nice firm collection in there, and then when I've done that I will go back and just top dress the surface with a little bit of the decorative mosses I've been collecting. And again, just so it doesn't look like a total mess. It looks like intentional, purposeful. And then as the bulbs grow and need more support, I can put in a few more branches a little bit higher up. But I'm not going to put them in tall to begin with, but I don't want the bulbs to be overwhelmed. It's sort of going to play catch up. So I might as well put in the ones I've got. So sort of coming up there, and then always looks nice and tidy, either with a bit of moss on the top, or if you had more gravel, that looks nice as well. Just to go through and sort of gives us, a slightly cleaner finish. And mimicking nature, really, imagining the bulbs that are actually growing in the wild. So we've got a little bit of a fairy garden going on again. I'm going to cut off those straggly bits. They don't look very attractive. Just teasing out the moss, tucking it in. I think this is the moss I scooped out from my sister's garden. Looks quite pretty. Not your normal run-of-the-mill moss. And then, a little bit of that. I did like these little bits of pine, a little bit of pine cone. It just gives you something to look at while it's just a mass of green. And then these beautiful bits of lichen. So indoors they dry out, but outdoors with a little bit of moisture they stay much more robust. So when I water my plants indoors, I do slosh a bit of water over the lichen just so it can rejuvenate, and it adds a little bit of it's a lighter, whiter green, so it just again adds visual interest, waiting for the main show to come on. So that probably brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you've enjoyed that, and thank you. I really enjoyed the chat about Julia Clements, and if you are a Julia Clements fan, a font of all knowledge, I would love to hear from you. So leave me a comment under the video, or drop me a line, email me, or comment in my free Facebook group, and I'd love to find out more about Julia and her place in social history as one of the founders of NAFAS. Not entirely sure about that, but I think that is true. So I'm going to put that down, and while I'm here, put my bits for the compost heap in this tray, and then I can start to tidy up. That's all for me for now, and I'll catch up with you next Tuesday at 9 o'clock. And if you are on Facebook, I'll be live in my Facebook group at 12 noon on Friday. And then I always upload my regular pre-recorded YouTube video at 3 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. So that's all for me for now, and I'll see you again next time. Muddy fingers need washing.